World War II was one of the most devastating conflicts in human history, with far-reaching and long-lasting consequences. Its effects can still be felt in today's world, from the shape of international politics to the global economy. In this essay, we will explore the ramifications of World War II and the alternate history scenario of The war had a profound impact on the world, both during and after its conclusion. During the war, millions of lives were lost, and countless people were displaced or forced into labor camps. The war also saw the use of new and devastating weapons, such as atomic bombs, which would have far-reaching consequences for international relations in the decades to come.
The city of Hiroshima lies prostrate after the withering blast which wiped out 53,000 of its population. 4 square miles of buildings leveled by the first of 2 small bombs that decided the fate of Japan.
After the war, the world was fundamentally changed. The victorious Allies established a new world order, with the United States emerging as the dominant superpower. The war also marked the beginning of the Cold War, a decades-long ideological conflict between the democratic West and the communist East. The war's effects were felt around the globe, with former colonial powers losing their empires and new nations emerging in their place. But what if the Axis powers had won the war? It is impossible to know precisely how history would have unfolded in such a scenario, but we can speculate on some of the likely consequences. The world would likely be a very different place. The Axis powers would have established a new world order with Germany and Japan as dominant powers. The defeated Allies would have been forced to accept harsh terms, with the United States losing its position as the world's leading superpower. The Soviet Union may have been weakened or even defeated, with communism being discredited as a viable political system. The consequences for international relations would have been significant. The defeat of the Allies would have meant the end of the United Nations and the establishment of a new world order based on Axis values. The world would be far less democratic, with authoritarian regimes dominating many nations. The Axis powers would have established their own economic system, which would have been hostile to the liberal capitalist system that currently dominates the world. There are several scenarios of an Axis victory in World War II that have been explored by various authors, historians, and alternate history enthusiasts. Some of these scenarios are The Man in the High Castle by Philip K. Dick. This novel explores a world where the Axis powers won World War II and divided the United States into 2 occupied zones, with the Japanese controlling the West Coast and the Germans controlling the East Coast. The novel focuses on the lives of several characters in this alternate timeline and the different paths they take. Fatherland by Robert Harris. This novel is set in 1964 in a world where Germany won World War II and established a Nazi regime across Europe. The novel follows a detective investigating the murder of a high-ranking Nazi official, which leads him to uncover a conspiracy that could threaten the stability of the regime. SSGB by Lynn Dighton. This novel is set in 1941 in a world where Germany won World War II and invaded and occupied Britain. The novel follows a Scotland Yard detective investigating a murder case that leads him to uncover a plot to overthrow the German occupation and restore the British monarchy. As mentioned, the following video will explore an Axis victory through a lens, but similar to that of TNO, the HOI-4 mod of a realistic Axis victory, which is more grounded in historical realism and research. In a hypothetical scenario where the Axis powers had won World War II, Japan would have emerged as a dominant power in the Asia-Pacific region. Under such a scenario, Japan would have likely expanded its territorial holdings and influence and made significant changes to its cultural and political stance. One possible outcome of an Axis victory would be Japan's complete annexation of China, as the war in China was a significant factor in Japan's decision to enter the war in the first place. Additionally, Japan may have acquired additional territories in Southeast Asia, including the Dutch East Indies, Vietnam, and the Philippines. Japan may have also established a system of vassal states or puppet regimes in these newly acquired territories, much like the Nazis did in Europe. These puppet states would have been subservient to Japan's interests and would have helped solidify Japan's regional dominance. Culturally, Japan may have sought to establish its own cultural sphere in Asia, with its language, customs, and traditions becoming dominant in the territories it controlled. This would have been a significant shift from Japan's pre-war policies of promoting a pan-Asian cultural identity and could have caused tension with other Asian countries that may have resisted such a shift. In terms of political ideology, Japan may have continued to embrace its fascist and militaristic policies, with the emperor remaining a figurehead and the military holding significant power. This would have likely caused tensions with other Axis powers such as Germany, who had their own political ideology and aspirations for dominance. Overall, a victorious Japan in an Axis victory scenario would have been a significant power in the Asia-Pacific region, with expanded territorial holdings, puppet states, and a dominant cultural and political influence, would have emerged as the dominant power in Europe. Under such a scenario, scenario, Germany would have likely expanded its territorial holdings and influence, and made significant changes to its cultural and political stance. Would be Germany's complete annexation of European territories such as France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Denmark. Germany may have also expanded its territory into Eastern Europe, including Poland, the Soviet Union, and the Balkans. In this scenario, Germany may have established puppet regimes or vassal states in these newly acquired territories, which would have been subservient to German interests and helped solidify German regional dominance. Culturally, Germany may have sought to establish its own cultural sphere in Europe, with its language, customs, and traditions becoming dominant in the territories it controlled. This would have been a significant shift from Germany's pre-war policies of promoting a pan-European cultural identity and could have caused tension with other European countries that may have resisted such a shift. In terms of political ideology, Germany would have continued to embrace its fascist and authoritarian policies, with the Nazi Party remaining in power and Hitler maintaining his status as Führer. The military would have also held significant power, and the suppression of political dissidents and minorities would have continued. In addition to territorial and cultural changes, a victorious Germany may have sought to establish a new economic order in Europe, with German industry and commerce dominating the continent. This could have led to a period of economic prosperity for Germany, but may have also caused resentment and conflict with other European countries. Overall, a victorious Germany in an Axis victory scenario would have been a dominant power in Europe, with expanded territorial holdings, puppet states, and a dominant cultural and political influence. Germany's fascist and authoritarian policies would have likely continued, and the country's economy would have been reshaped to serve its interests. Italy would have emerged as a significant regional power in Europe and the Mediterranean. Under such a scenario, Italy would have likely expanded its territorial holdings and influence and made significant changes to its cultural and political stance. One possible outcome of an Axis victory would be Italy's annexation of territories in the Balkans, such as Yugoslavia and Greece. Italy may have also expanded its control in North Africa, including Egypt, Libya, and Tunisia. In this scenario, Italy may have established puppet regimes or vassal states in these newly acquired territories, which would have been subservient to Italian interests and helped solidify Italy's regional dominance. Culturally, Italy may have sought to establish its own cultural sphere in the Mediterranean, with its language, customs, and traditions becoming dominant in the territories it controlled. This could have caused tension with other Mediterranean countries that may have resisted such a shift. In terms of political ideology, Italy would have continued to embrace its fascist and authoritarian policies, with the National Fascist Party remaining in power and Mussolini maintaining his status as Duce. The military would have also held significant power, and the suppression of political dissidents and minorities would have continued. In addition to territorial and cultural changes, a victorious Italy may have sought to establish a new economic order in the Mediterranean, with Italian industry and commerce dominating the region. This could have led to a period of economic prosperity for Italy, but may have also caused resentment and conflict with other Mediterranean countries. Overall, a victorious Italy in an Axis victory scenario would have been a significant regional power in Europe and the Mediterranean, with expanded territorial holdings, puppet states, and a dominant cultural and political influence. Italy's fascist and authoritarian policies would have likely continued, and the country's economy would have been reshaped to serve its interests. It is likely that Italy would be overshadowed by Germany, which would emerge as the dominant power in Europe. Although Italy would have expanded its territorial holdings and influence, it would still be a smaller and less powerful country than Germany. Italy may have attempted to resist German influence by forming alliances with other countries in the region. Spain and Turkey would be potential allies for Italy, as they also maintained authoritarian regimes and may have been wary of German dominance. An Italian-led alliance with Spain and Turkey would provide a counterbalance to German power and could help prevent Germany from dominating the entire continent. However, it is also possible that Italy may have aligned itself more closely with Germany in this scenario in order to maintain its own regional power and protect its territorial holdings. Italy and Germany had a close alliance during World War II, and an Axis victory would have strengthened this alliance. Italy may have sought to establish itself as a junior partner to Germany in exchange for protection and support from the larger and more powerful country. Regardless of whether Italy resisted or aligned itself with German influence, it is likely that Italy would have remained a smaller and less dominant country in Europe than Germany. The cultural and political changes brought about by an Axis victory would have also affected Italy, and it would have had to adapt to the new realities of the post-war world order. In a hypothetical scenario where the Axis powers had won World War II, it is possible that the Soviet Union could have collapsed into smaller states with broad ideological leanings. If the Soviet Union had been pushed back into the Urals and forced to surrender, it would have been severely weakened both politically and militarily. One possible outcome of this scenario is that the Soviet Union could have fragmented into smaller states, each with its own distinct ideology and political system. These states could have been based on ethnic or regional lines, with some areas breaking away and forming independent independent republics. This could have been due to a number of factors, such as long-standing ethnic tensions or differing political ideologies. In addition, the Soviet Union had a centrally planned economy that was heavily reliant on the state. If the country had been forced to surrender and its economy collapsed, this could have led to widespread social and economic dislocation, making it difficult for a centralized government to maintain control. The collapse of the Soviet Union could have also resulted in a power vacuum, as various political factions vied for control in the aftermath of the war. The newly formed states could have had differing ideological leanings, ranging from communist to nationalist or even fascist. This fragmentation could have been influenced by external factors such as Germany and Japan seeking to establish puppet states in the former Soviet territories. It is also possible that different regions of the former Soviet Union could have been aligned with different global powers, such as the United States or China, which could have further complicated the geopolitical landscape. It is possible that warlords could have emerged in the Urals region and formed their own mini-countries with different ideologies. One possible group that could have emerged is the Ural Cossacks, a historically significant and proud people who had a strong military tradition. They could have seized control of the region and formed a Cossack state based on their traditional values and way of life. The Cossack state could have been conservative and authoritarian, with a strong emphasis on military discipline and tradition. Another possible group is the Tartars, a Turkic-speaking people who had been oppressed under Soviet rule. They could have formed their own state based on their national identity and Islamic faith. The Tartar state could have been more liberal than the Cossack state, with a greater emphasis on religious and cultural freedoms. It is also possible that other groups could have formed their own mini-countries in the region. For example, the Ural Mountains are home to a number of different ethnic groups, such as Bashkirs, Chuvash, and Mari, who could have formed their own states based on their cultural identity. In addition, some warlords could have formed states based on their political ideology. For example, there could have been communist or socialist states in the region who could have attempted to establish a new Soviet Union based on Marxist-Leninist principles. There could have also been fascist or nationalist states who could have aligned themselves with Germany or Japan and sought to establish authoritarian rule. The collapse of the Soviet Union into smaller states could have led to the emergence of warlords in the Urals region who could have formed their own mini-countries based on different ethnic or ideological lines. The ideologies of such mini-countries could have ranged from conservative and authoritarian to more liberal and culturally diverse. The political landscape of the region would have been highly complex and diverse, with different groups vying for control and influence. In a hypothetical scenario where the Soviet Union had collapsed into smaller states and warlords had emerged in the Urals region, it is possible that some high-ranking Soviet officers could have continued the war against the Axis powers. Here are some examples of such officers. Georgy Zhukov. Zhukov was a prominent Soviet military commander during World War II, and he played a key role in several major battles, including the Battle of Stalingrad and the Battle of Berlin. After the war, he fell out of favor with Joseph Stalin and was sent to command troops in the Urals military district. In an alternate timeline, Zhukov could have continued to fight against the Axis powers and could have become a prominent leader of the resistance in the Urals. Ivan Konev. Konev was another Soviet military commander who played a key role in several major battles during World War II. After the war, he was appointed as the commander of the Central Group of Forces, which was responsible for defending the Soviet Union's western borders. In an alternate timeline, Konev could have been one of the senior officers who retreated to the Urals and continued to fight against the Axis powers. Konstantin Rokossovsky. Rokossovsky was a prominent Soviet military commander who played a key role in the defense of Moscow during World War II. After the war, he was appointed as the commander of the Polish army, but he fell out of favor with the Soviet leadership and was imprisoned for several years. In an alternate timeline, Rokossovsky could have escaped imprisonment and joined the resistance in the Urals Nikolai Vatutin. Vatutin was a Soviet military commander who played a key role in the defense of Kiev and the liberation of Ukraine during World War II. After the war, he was appointed as the commander of the Transcaucasian Military District. In an alternate timeline, Vatutin could have retreated to the Urals and continued to fight against the Axis powers. In a hypothetical scenario where the Axis powers had emerged victorious in World War II, the leadership of several major countries would have been dramatically different from what we see today. Here are some possible leaders in such a scenario. Germany. The head of state in Germany would likely have been Adolf Hitler, who was the leader of the Nazi Party and the architect of Germany's aggressive foreign policy. In 1950, Hitler would have been in his 60s, and it is possible that he would have named a successor to take over in the event of his death. One possible successor could have been Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of the SS and had a great deal of influence over Hitler. Italy. In Italy, the head of state would likely have been Benito Mussolini, who was the founder of the fascist movement in Italy and the leader of the country from 1922 until he was deposed in 1943. In 1950, Mussolini would have been in his 70s, and it is possible that he would have named a successor to take over in the event of his death. One possible successor could have been his son-in-law, Galeazzo Ciano, who was a prominent member of the Italian fascist government. Japan. In Japan, the head of state would likely have been Emperor Hirohito, who was the symbol of the Japanese state and the commander-in-chief of the Japanese armed forces. In 1950, Hirohito would have been in his 40s, and it is possible that he would have been heavily influenced by the military leaders who had brought Japan to victory in the war. One possible successor could have been General Hideki Tojo, who was the Prime Minister of Japan during much of the war and was known for his hardline stance against the Allied powers United States. In the United States, the head of state would likely have been President Henry A. Wallace, who was a prominent politician and had served as vice president under Franklin D. Roosevelt. Wallace was known for his progressive views and his support for international cooperation, but in an Axis victory scenario, it is possible that he would have taken a hawkish stance against the Axis powers. France. In France, the head of state would likely have been Marshal Philippe Pétain, who was the leader of the Vichy government during the war and had collaborated with the Nazi occupation forces. In 1950, Pétain would have been in his 90s, and it is possible that he would have been seen as a figurehead, with real power residing in the hands of his advisors. In an alternate timeline where the Axis powers had won World War II, the world would have been drastically different from what we know today. The leaders of the victorious powers would have been celebrated as heroes, while the defeated powers would have been forced to accept their new status as second-class nations. In this video essay, we explored an alternate history scenario where the Axis powers won World War II. We discussed the territorial changes and cultural shifts that would occur in Japan, Germany, and Italy. We also considered the potential collapse of the Soviet Union and the rise of Russian warlords, as well as some possible candidates for continuing the war on behalf of it. Additionally, we identified possible leaders for 1950. This alternate history scenario raises many questions and prompts discussion about the potential consequences of such a world-changing event. What other changes might have occurred in this alternate reality? How might the world have developed differently over time? We invite viewers to share their thoughts and opinions in the comments section below.